Today I'm going to discuss symmetrical balance. Terms you should know. Artistic elements are different design elements such as color, mark, shape, form, etc. Composition in the visual arts is the placement or arrangement of artistic elements in a work of art. The artistic elements that are used create things such as focal point, balance, etc. Picture plane. The picture plane is the area that a designer works on. For example, if an artist is working on a stretched canvas, that canvas is the picture plane. If a web designer is creating a new web page, that is their picture plane. A sheet of paper for somebody who's drawing is the picture plane, etc. and so forth. So, some facts about balance. On an unconscious level, we humans strive to create order out of chaos. In the visual sense, we seek balance when viewing a design. When a design is not balanced, it creates an uneasy, disquieting feeling in the viewer. We humans tend to see bilaterally, which is side to side. So what is balance? Balance is when you use different artistic elements of art, such as lines, shapes, colors, and arrange them to create a feeling of visual weight or equilibrium in that piece of art. There are 4 different types of balance, but I'll cover the 2 commonly most used, which are symmetrical balance, which I'll be speaking about today, and asymmetrical balance. So, vertical axis. Unconsciously, the viewer imagines a vertical axis running through the center of the picture plane. The visual weight of the artistic elements on either side of that plane establish balance, and I'll explain that in a minute. In Western culture, we learn to read from left to right. This is the same for how we view the picture plane. We look at it from left to right. We also, on an unconscious level, think of the picture plane as having a top, a bottom, a left, and a right. Again, these are things that you've known for years and have forgotten, but we do create an orientation for the picture plane. So, symmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance, which also can be called bilateral symmetry, is the easiest type of symmetry to recognize, as the same shapes are repeated on either side of the left and the right on the vertical axis. There are 2 types of symmetrical balance. One is formal and one is informal. So let's start with formal symmetrical balance. In formal symmetrical balance, the same things are found on either side of the vertical axis. So in this image right here, what it appears to me happened is the artist, say, had this image here, and they copied it and flipped it over in a program like Photoshop. So these are perfectly reflecting one another on either side of that vertical axis. The placement is identical. Nothing has been altered as far as that goes. So we see a shadow here, we see the exact same shadow here. We see this circle here, we see the exact same circle there, and the placement is the same. Here's another example of formal symmetrical balance. So when I talk about elements of design, one thing I like to talk about is how we perceive things on an unconscious level. I think if you understand these things, then you can consciously use them in your artwork and design and get the results that you want. So often you've known this, you've forgotten about it. So with symmetrical balance, whether it's formal or informal, it tends to give a feeling on an unconscious level of permanence, of strength, of stability. It can be considered classical, sedate, calm, and dignified. Now you'll see it used a lot in architecture. Granted, if you get into some of the very avant-garde types of architecture, you will see asymmetrical balance. But the most common form that's used is symmetrical balance, formal symmetrical balance at that. So, I mean, think about it. If you were going to walk into a 20-story building and it looked as if it was going to fall over, you probably wouldn't encourage you to want to walk in there. So, the disadvantage of symmetrical balance in general as a design concept is if it's overdone, then it can in fact be boring. But I want to take a step back and look at these words that I've just covered with you. First of all, please keep in mind that these words are not the only words that can be applied to this concept. There's other ones that you will discover as you go down, as you become more and more aware of this as designers. But the other thing I really encourage is learn the rules and then break them. When people talk about thinking outside of the box, I always think of it as you've understood the rules, you've understood how to apply them, and now you're finding ways to work against them and make that work as well. So one thing I notice if we look at this design right here, which is formal symmetrical balance, I wouldn't necessarily call this piece calm and sedate. Now there's other elements of design that are happening in this piece that are creating a lot of visual energy. The patterns that are used in there, the bright colors, so on and so forth, is really ramping up the energy on this piece and making it feel anything but sedate. So here's an example of a piece that the artist is working against the common feeling that this piece would, that symmetrical balance gives. So, way of thinking outside of the box. Now, there's a second type of symmetrical balance, and that's called informal symmetrical balance. It's similar to formal symmetry, with the same reflected items on either side of the implied vertical axis, but they're not perfectly mirrored from side to side. The human form is an example of informal symmetry. We are, as human beings, we are not formal symmetry, we're informal. We've all got little things that are off. When approaching formal symmetrical balance, when approaching informal symmetrical balance, I suggest having no more than 3 areas that have noticeable differences. I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I'd like to draw your attention down here. So in this case, this is formal symmetrical balance. This is placed here. It's placed in the same spot. It's just flipped over. These little items here are in the same spot. Now, here is informal symmetrical balance. You'll notice that this building is slightly taller than that one and slightly smaller in width. You'll notice that some of these little green objects have been moved around, but they are still more or less in the same areas. Even the clouds have had some alterations. So formal, informal. Here's a nice piece by Georgia O'Keeffe. Again, informal symmetrical balance. So let's look at some of the differences here. At the bottom of the skull, it's missing part of the skull. This area in here does not match up with this area in here. There's some other various differences in here. Now we have a red stripe on this side and one over here, but this one is half the size of that. The thing that I find really interesting about this piece is what she's done with this black bar. As I said earlier, on the unconscious level, we human beings look at the picture plane and we imagine a imaginary vertical axis. Well, she has this slightly off to the right. Part of it is borders on it, but a good part of that black bar is off to the right of that. And what this does is it creates a type of unconscious tension in the piece. We're not necessarily aware of it, but there's a part of us that on an unconscious level would like to push that black bar more into the center so that it's bilaterally splitting the picture plane. So this is a great trick that artists can use to create tension in a piece. Here's some furniture, again, the way that they're displaying it. And we're really actually not so much concentrating on the furniture as the overall composition. We've got kind of some different hues in here, okay? A little bit of a variation in the direction that the chairs are in, but these are still a form of symmetrical balance, informal symmetrical balance. And last but not least, again, another room. We've got a table over here with a lamp. We've got the lamp over here too. Now we start seeing some variations. There's some items here. This is not over on that side. These pictures are very similar but different. So this is a form of informal symmetrical balance. So sometimes an artist will create a piece either intentionally or unintentionally that isn't balanced. This is an example of a piece right here where the artist has intentionally created a piece that's not balanced. On an unconscious level, what this does is it kind of creates an uneasy feeling or dissatisfaction in the viewer. The idea is that you look at this and you want to kind of just physically push everything over to the side so that it has a border on all four sides. So, and keep this one in mind because sometimes you might see a piece and you'll wonder why something doesn't seem to be working and you're not sure what the compositional issue is. It really could be about the balance. It's not always going to be that, but give that a thought. Think about that when you're looking at it. So as I mentioned before, we humans are not, we are informal symmetrical balance. And here is a photo of the actress Audrey Hepburn, and one of them has been altered to look like formal symmetrical balance. Which one do you think it is? Take a moment to think about it. And also, what do you think it looks like? Once how's it appear, her appearance altered? How do you feel about that? When you get a face and you make it look perfectly balanced. Now this slide and the last slide, I'm going to show and pause the video and ask students to give me feedback, but I'd like to know if this is formal or informal symmetry and why do you think that? And again, another piece, is this formal or informal symmetry and why is that?